Yeah.
The test centers are important, as the West is encouraging people to test and test and
Yes.
test. So I think the test centers are missing. We have only one hospital, which is the Afghan Japan Hospital in Kabul, which is the main coronavirus treatment center, and the testing facilities are I think they are stationed in Kabul as well. But the main problem at the beginning of the pandemic was that people had to send tests from Herat to Kabul and wait days for it to arrive. And a consequence, we have lost many lives because of that. Also, another problem that we have in terms of health-wise is that we have 3 doctors per 1,000 people in our country. So imagine, this is under the normal circumstances. This is already a huge problem, and I think this situation is a catastrophe.
Yeah, and those 3 doctors per 1,000 people in Afghanistan are also not equally distributed all over the country. Like there are people who may live.
Health workers are targeted in the conflict.
Yes, exactly. And what's really shocking is that. Like I have an uncle and I have some other close relatives in Afghanistan who are doctors, general practitioners in Afghanistan, and they all live in Kabul. Okay, when they graduate from university and they become doctors, they stick in safe areas like in Kabul, in Mazar, in Herat, Jalalabad. Why? Because these doctors, they also have to provide for their families. They can't risk it all and go all the way in Ghor or in Bamiyan or in maybe in Paktika or whatever, where they're in a very vulnerable and unsafe situation. So these doctors tend to concentrate in safe and urban areas. And as Ahmed Walid mentioned, 74% of the people in Afghanistan live in rural areas. So if you have 3 doctors per 1,000 Afghans, and all of them are concentrated in safer rural areas, how about those people in rural areas? One can only imagine that this crisis, this pandemic, will even further jeopardize, the situation of rural communities.
And I think another issue. I mean, at the end of the day, this sounds really. This slogan has actually been criticized a lot in the West, that the virus doesn't discriminate, because if we think of it, it does.
Yeah.
But like the poor are more likely to suffer.
Yeah.
But in any case, the Afghan government took the initiative that, in order to combat the spread of this pandemic, we need to raise awareness.
Yeah.
So instead of my personal opinion is that the government should not really have focused so much on raising awareness as to the pandemic. It should have actually spent quite valuable time that we had. We actually had a head start in buying kit and buying testing equipment. One person I know in Afghanistan told me that, he advised certain government figures to spend money in the beginning stages on kits and equipment, but they spent 27 million Afghanis on raising awareness primarily through television.
Yeah.
Now, 27 million Afghanis, my mental maths isn't that good, but it's somewhere between 300 to 400,000 pounds. If every pound is 80 Afghanis, it's about 300 to 400,000. Now, most of Afghanistan is illiterate. Most of Afghanistan does not have a television, right?
Yeah.
The most of Afghanistan is not accessible to the government either, because there's a conflict or infrastructure is poor. So there was quite valuable time. We had a head start. We were not as badly affected as Iran, for example, but the government, quite frankly, didn't adopt a realistic policy in spreading awareness as to the virus?
Well, I think I don't know. This is my personal opinion. I think this entire cash flow in Afghanistan is and cash flow and aid in general is not helping. It's not helping. It's not helping the economy or the economic development. Or the military advancement, or the healthcare system, or the education system. So we need to understand actually where this the cash goes to, where the aid goes to, and then we have to start demanding and asking for the government and accountability, and hold the government accountable. So I think. The aid provided by international communities, not only in Afghanistan but in any underdeveloped and troubled nation around the globe, has very, very little to do with economic development. Has very little to do, and it actually destroys. In fact, it destroys many other things, many developing routes, and it gives a kind of an open atmosphere and gives space to businesses such as illegal mining and narcotic business, etc., rather than helping the country's sustainability or development. So we have neglected not only during the COVID-19 pandemic, but in the last 19 years we've neglected many things. If we had like many Western countries are being criticized for it, for following the capitalism route and for investing in many other sectors rather than health sector. In Afghanistan as well, we have we haven't invested actually. We have neglected so many things.
Sure.
Like, healthcare, it was one of them. I mean, I think we have more private hospitals in Afghanistan than public hospitals. I mean, the privatization of healthcare, privatization of pharmacies, privatization of. You've mentioned before about your. Mr. Sangar mentioned about his relatives being doctors. The doctors are not. They're not being valued. They have to be valued, and they have to be provided extra benefits and provided extra secure environment for them in Afghanistan from the government to actually function adequately and to work and to move to areas, to rural areas, and the government also has to invest a lot in the education. We can't afford having 3 doctors for 1,000 persons for the next 10 years. That's by itself is a catastrophe in a country like Afghanistan, where the politicians are coming on TV chanting about them doing a lot of things for the nation, and when you go into the details, you see that in a country where half of the population lives, more than half of the population lives under the poverty line, why do you need to privatize hospitals?
When it's already like when it's already not really functioning well, they think that if we privatize it, the private sector will do a better job at managing those hospitals, which is a political ideology. This is a trend in the neoliberalism here in Western countries, where they after the
very Thatcherite idea.
So after the 60s and 70s in Western countries, they said, you know what, the private sector is more efficient and more effective. They're able to do a lot of work much better than the state bureaucracy, which in some cases that may be true. That's a valid argument in some cases. However, if we look at Afghanistan, we have a society in a constant state of crisis. There's 40 years of war, and we have we lack the facilities, the infrastructure to do a lot of things, whether it's in the private or the public sector. So
we don't have the luxury of choice.
Yes, yeah. So
people cannot afford a simple prescription when they go to pharmacies to buy it.
Yeah.
And there are so many corruptions even in health sector. I mean, the doctors and pharmacies have connection with each other. They prescribe medicines that the patient doesn't even need. So the patient goes home with the bags of medicines that they don't even need to have, and they don't even to take.
Yeah.
And the corruption is in every it's actually as rooted and in the past 19 years in our society as various institutions and government. The probably one of the challenging things is one of the most important thing is to challenge this corruption. How to challenge it is it's very varies, because the corruption is the corruption in countries like Afghanistan and Africa is functional to the West and to Americans. And if it wasn't, they would have declined it. They would have fought against it, and they wouldn't have provided bags of cash to the politicians.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we had the associate director of Human Rights Watch on the podcast, and Mrs. Gossman, and she made a very interesting point that in Afghanistan, the counter-terrorism mission with state building, these two contradicted each other, and that's why you had the CIA handing out bags of cash to politicians and to warlords, even though this actually doesn't help state building at all. It does the opposite. But it's funny because, you know, with this podcast, I was sort of thinking, you know what, it's a healthcare crisis. We're not going to get too deep into the politics of it, but invariably, no matter what, it seems that we always come down to a very root problem that is very corrosive in society and in governance in Afghanistan, and that is corruption.
Yes.
So regardless of the development, the central government wants to respond to something, it can't respond. Oh, why? Corruption is a big problem that it has, which leads me to the next point. There's 500 Sangar, I think you tweeted about this as well. You mentioned bureaucracy, neoliberalism thing. The Afghan Ministry for Health wants to set up what was it? I missed it.
They want to so let me explain. So we have in Afghanistan about 24 ministries, okay? Ministries.
Yeah.
So
hundreds of generals.
Yes, we have hundreds of generals. But see, to make this clear, the Netherlands is a small country. It's very developed and a very well organized country, and we have probably a dozen ministries here in this country. So if you have the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands, the Ministry of Health has a vast number of responsibilities, all related to health. It's their job. But in Afghanistan, what we have is that we already have too many ministries. Like there is a ministry for tribal affairs, and there is a ministry for whatnot. And all these ministries, they are created to give people titles and jobs. They don't really, these organizations are not really created to solve a problem. So that's already a problem in our society. In our government, in Afghanistan, we already have too many titles and institutions and bureaucracies that are not really functional. Then we have the pandemic, the corona pandemic in Afghanistan, and famine. And you see these reports of people that are going to die, like 7 million children are facing starvation. And what is the response of the Afghan government? Let's create a new bureaucracy Yeah, especially for combating this crisis. So what happened to the health ministry? Why?
Is it to raise awareness, or is it to do something?
No, it's like a separate like task force type of organization. Someone is going to be in charge of it, and this new umbrella.
Basically, a health ministry 2.0.